So local, there's a lot of hype around local marketplaces, especially out in the valley. And so I thought I'd just take a few minutes to talk about like what does local even mean when we talk about local marketplace. Oops. There we go. So my quick background was I founded a mobile music company that Google acquired. I spent a bunch of time at Google launching Google Express, which was their same-day delivery program out in the valley. Launched that to 10 cities, and then came back to build Ritual that we recently started in Toronto last year. So for Ritual, I think the idea for those of you who have never tried the service is it's a concierge service for your everyday coffee and lunch. Makes everyday coffee and lunch really, really awesome. So if you haven't tried it, you should. So what exactly is local? I think basically at the highest level is just connecting the real world with the internet. I think that a big part of digital and a big part of our searches and activity online results in real world purchases and real world commerce. And this is actually a big problem. It sounds like it's the challenge for companies like Google and companies that run like big online advertising platforms is they can't actually track what happens between online ad clicks and local purchases. So it's actually a really big problem for them where they're trying to figure this out, but it's really difficult. What you're seeing sort of come up from in the valley and in other spots, even in Toronto now, is a bunch of local marketplaces that are sort of like end-to-end local services. So the beginning and the end of the experience is basically digital, end-to-end, and so it doesn't really have a lot of this tracking issue because fundamentally the service is local, sort of hooked up to a mobile app or an online service. Think about a lot of food delivery companies, Uber and taxi. We're basically getting companies like this in almost every different local vertical start to pop up. And so, the real question is like, why is there so much hype around local and sort of why do investors sort of pay so much attention to this? And I think Groupon is a really interesting case study. So there's a lot of, they've definitely had their struggles lately, but I think the thing to remember was Groupon was actually the fastest growing business in the history of business, right? So basically in 2 years, they hit almost $1 billion of revenue. And they basically turned down an acquisition offer for almost $6 billion. So it's unheard of basically for any company to hit that kind of revenue trajectory that quickly. And the things that we have like Uber and other sort of similar companies that have had similar stories, I think we're seeing a number of different local companies grow really, really fast because the main thing to sort of take away from that is this is not a new bucket of online spend that these companies are targeting. It's actually people's real world everyday spend. And so when this stuff starts to tip, it goes really, really fast. And things go from thousands to 10,000s to literally like hundreds of millions really, really quickly, way faster than a lot of online services have previously done. So why does local matter in terms of like for people? I think what really draws people to this is the fact that you can finally now use the internet to make your actual real world life better, right? Which wasn't really possible like 5 to 7 years ago. It was basically you had this concept of my online life versus like my real world life. And now what we're seeing is the internet's actually just improving and saving us time every day. So one example from Ritual in terms of what we do is basically save people time every day for their coffee and lunch breaks. And so rather than you waiting in lineups and dealing with in-store payment, the app times your coffee order so it's ready for you right when you walk in. And if you've got to wait 20 or 25 minutes for lunch, the app tells you exactly when to leave. So you show up, and instead of you waiting for your lunch is waiting for you. And that's basically, you could say that, well, it's 10 or 15 minutes, but for a lot of people who drink 2 coffees a day and one lunch a day, this quickly starts to add up to hours and days over a long period of time. The stat is pretty ridiculous. It's something like every day we spend 3,800 years in coffee and lunch lineups. So it's a lot of time spent in line every day. So I think convenience is sort of the like real world convenience is the sort of the the killer aspect of it. I think beyond that, just even discovery. So the problem with a lot of local businesses is that they don't. A lot of this data doesn't really exist anywhere, and so it's really hard. Okay, it's really hard to. Okay, I'm being told my time's up, so I'm going to skip through this quickly. So, discovery. So, discovery is really powerful. We can show you stuff that you really can't. It's awesome for merchants too. So we've launched an awesome program that lets merchants retarget on users. So stuff that only Amazon and sort of other digital companies can do. But now regular local small businesses can take their existing customers and have them come back way more often than they normally would. And the last 2 points here are why is it difficult? So the main one is that the data around it is really messy, and you're dealing with a lot of humans and a lot of local data that doesn't really exist. And so these things are messy, and people aren't software, and so you have to design a lot of process to make them actually reliable. If you look at like food delivery, for example, it's a good example of that. And the last one is that unlike most software companies, this is sort of like hardware in the sense of iteration is just very, very difficult. It's sort of like you're operating real world stuff, and when you make a change, it actually involves a lot of work to like redeploy that across hundreds of merchants or across many cities. So you actually have to kind of get it right the first time. And that's it. If you haven't tried Ritual, your next coffee and lunch are on me with that promo code. Hey.
So we're building actually a music platform for producers and Ritual and connect creators with the listeners. What was the music app that you created?
Sorry? The question was, what was the music app that we built a while ago? So we had an app that allowed non-iPhones to sync with iTunes back when the iPhone was 1% of all handsets. So it makes absolutely no sense today, but it did 7 years ago. Hey.
How did you decide how many vendors to start with when you released Ritual?
Yeah, so how do we decide how many vendors we started with? We actually didn't. So we went the opposite way, where we focused on neighborhoods, and our focus was to get really high density in the neighborhoods that we operated in, and that's still kind of the formula that we use today. And so we don't actually have like a number of merchants. We actually have a density metric of what percentage coverage do we need in the neighborhoods that we operate. Yeah. Hey.
How did you find these merchants? Did you walk in the store, or did you call them? What was your sales process?
All of the what was our sales process with merchants? All of the above. So basically, we're working with very small merchants. So a lot of large chains like McDonald's and Starbucks are actually rolling out something very similar, their own mobile ordering platform. So we're working with everyone that's not Starbucks and McDonald's. Hey. Yeah, that's a great question. Why Toronto and not San Francisco? So we did a lot of data analysis on the local landscape in the East Coast versus the West Coast, and so we found that not only did people spend more on quick service on the East Coast, so not just Toronto, but even like Chicago, Boston, New York. The other problem with the West Coast is there's too many tech companies that provide free lunches for people, and so so like the people at Google don't understand what this problem is, right? So it's like just line up at their cafeteria. So I think there were a bunch of factors that made us kind of conclude the East Coast was the right place for us to start. And Toronto, if you just go down the list, like New York's kind of its own thing. And so if you just kind of work your way down the list, Toronto, Chicago, Boston are your, Philadelphia are your next cities. And so Toronto was a really good, we feel it's a really good proxy for large US East Coast cities.
Last question.
Hey.
Within Toronto, how do you prioritize which neighborhoods to start first?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we focus, how do we prioritize neighborhoods that we operate in? So we focus on neighborhoods that have high corporate density, so basically companies. So we don't like residential areas, we like places where people work, because that's what has the sort of everyday coffee and lunch spend. So we basically operate in every neighborhood of Toronto that has very, very high corporate density. Yeah. Good? Or one more?
We'll have one more question.
Okay. Yeah, we think about that a lot. After coffee and lunch, what is our next corporate? What is our next market? I think that we're pretty focused. I mean, quick service restaurant spend in the United States is $250 billion. So it's as big as all of e-commerce. So I think just getting this right, it's going to be once we have the right formula, just scaling this out is going to take a long, long time. So I think we're pretty focused on getting this right.
Thanks.
Cool.